to another video. Today we're going to be talking about something that I really love, and that is French pastries. So we're going to go ahead and explore the history and also look at how these pastries are made, as well as we have a few sitting right over here that we're going to take a closer look at. So let's go ahead and talk briefly about the history of baking and French pastries, and then let's take a closer look at them on my table over here. So everything started with the French and the need for something sweet after their meal, and they would have fruits and cheeses, and eventually it became an art creating these pastries and baking as well. So this is when delicious confections came to life. It was in 1270 that Renaud Barbin decided that he wanted to make confectioners, sort of the precursor to confectioner's sugar, and that's when it all started to grow and to the amazing industry that is French pastry and confectionery today. So it's very famous for its decadent desserts and delightful pastries. And the word dessert is actually derived from the French word desservir, which is to clear the table. So sort of clearing away the palate after a nice meal. So that was sort of the beginning, and it started with those customs. And then it really did turn into that full-blown art form. So that's sort of what won the hearts of the world over, with this chocolate and cakes and things of that nature. So it's been sort of celebrated since that moment. And that's really when the dessert craft was perfected. So in the 17th and 18th century, the French and even royal chefs who were almost celebrities, and they made magnificent dessert sculptures. You may have seen them in your favorite TV show, things coming out of the cake and whatnot. And they tried to be as extravagant as possible. A good place to start exploring is in the famous cookbook, Le Cuisinier François, published in 1651 by Varennes. And he was born in Burgundy, and he worked as a professional chef in some of the greatest households of the time. So he gathered together all of his greatest recipes into that popular book, and it had many re-editions throughout the centuries. So that included recipes for frog's legs and fritters, ragouts, pottages, and other things, as well as pastries, so covered breads and things of that nature. And at that time it required, you can do it at home, but it required a very distinct trade craft. A lot of these French festivals and religious ceremonies required some of these complex recipes, and it really highlighted them as well. So a lot of it was sort of based around the religious calendar, when these foods were in season, and which ingredients could be used at different times and things like that. So many of the regional treats in France are connected to those religious events. So again, this really ties into the larger history about France and its culinary history. Now, of course, we're going to talk about the history of Paris at some point, but the story of these pastries and baked goods is a part of that story. These ceremonies would be, for example, leading up to Lent, and certain fats, along with meat, eggs, and dairy would not be used. There's a lot of nursery rhymes and things like that. Mardi Gras, which means Fat Tuesday. So it's kind of various cultural references that talk about these culinary habits. And again, it really ties in, I think, today with the overall French culture. So in the 18th century, 17th, 18th century, in Napoleon's time, there was brioche and cream puffs, eclairs, and also in the 19th century, Paris became the home to open-air cafes and sitting and sipping on your cafe outside with other people. So this was when Paris was really pioneering these recipes and the accessibility and the delivery of this product. So by the end of the 18th century, there was 100 pastry cooks in Paris. But by 1986, it had risen to 40,000. So, that's a lot. So in 1889, with the World's Fair, that sort of brought along the foundations of that cafe culture and sort of started that hotel hospitality thing that you see across Europe and really just everywhere. So as people tried to reconnect with the sort of aristocratic behaviors, the bourgeois wanted these patisseries, and this was when a lot of these businesses started. Paul, for example, which started bursting throughout the country and also the world. And that sort of was the beginning of that cafe culture again in 1889, I believe it was, for the World's Fair. And I think that really played a role as well. So today the term patisserie is a legally controlled term, so it requires years of extensive training, and I think it's employed with a license and certification, if I'm not mistaken. So how are French pastries different? In that they are buttery and flaky, and they require hours often of time of preparation to get the cream just right and to be extra careful in preparing with perfect design and extreme dedication. So layered desserts like millefeuille and other complex desserts are very common like that. So you understand the art that goes into this. So let's actually go take a seat of chatting about history, and let's go take a look at these desserts and talk about their history and take a look at their deliciousness and chocolatiness, and we can perhaps learn some more. So here's our dessert here. We have a hazelnut chocolate bar with milk chocolate sort of sauce here. We have a Paris-Brest. We have a Merlat, another beautiful chocolate dish. We have some macarons, and we have Au Chocolat and a regular croissant. In about 1566, the confectioner's sugar was created, and it was the beginning of the pastry sort of revolution. 1660, the year whipped cream was invented, and 1686, the beginning of the cafe culture, and Le Procope. It's the first, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but it was the first Parisian cafe with coffee, tea, ice cream, and chocolate. 1778 is the year of the first nougat factory. And then macarons were invented in 1793. 1808 is the year brioche became very popular. And then 12 years later, the piping bag was invented. 1850, we have Ganache. And then in late 1800s, we have candied chestnuts. So, to begin with, we have Macarons, which is a sweet meringue-based confection made with egg white, icing sugar, granulated sugar, almond meal, and food coloring. There is some variation in the term macaron and macaron, French macaron, and we're going to be going with the French macaron. This was introduced to the French by the Italian chef of Queen Catherine de' Medici of the Renaissance. So, since the 19th century, it is presented with ganache, buttercream, or jam filling. So it's sort of like a sandwich cookie. And it easily melts in your mouth. So these have been produced in Venetian monasteries since the 8th century. And again, it has a history that really starts in 1792 when macarons began to gain fame. Two Carmelite nuns seeking asylum in Nancy during the French Revolution sort of baked and sold these macarons. And then basically in the 30s, the French Patisserie which has been credited with the creation of some of the sort of modern macaroon, but it became trendy and sort of really exploded in the 2010s in North America. But let's go ahead and open these and take a look at them further. So we have raspberry, lemon, pistachio, caramel, and this one's chocolate, and this one I'm not really sure. But let's see if we can just see just very jammy and moist inside. It's very delicious. Next, let's move on to the Paris-Brest. So next we have the Paris-Brest, which is a circle of cream puffs lined with a buttery hazelnut custard, and often topped with a cap of sliced or slivered almonds, crunchy sugar, cookie crust. And it was named for the bicycle race that runs from the French capital, Paris to Brest, and the naval town in Brittany. And in 1891, paper editor Pierre Giffard hoped to encourage bicycle use in Brest by launching a race to Paris. So they asked the local pastry chef Louis Durand, pâtissier of Maison Lafitte, and they made this pastry here with a sort of a wheel shape, a circular shape, and now it's very popular. So that's pretty much explains the origins of that. And as you can see, there's a beautiful sort of custard that's in here, a hazelnut cream, and it's really, really delicious as well. So that to the side here. And next we will look at the crunchy pastry, which is a hazelnut biscuit with crispy praline and whipped chantilly with a crispy milk chocolate plate. Now, to begin, hazelnuts grow wild in north and western France, and so they've been long used as additions to pastries and cakes in French pastry making. And chocolate was first, also you can see a lot of that. You can see that hazelnut here dipped in gold, or gold coloring. And this was basically chocolate was a wedding gift in 1615 to 14-year-old King Louis XIII. And that's Anne of Austria, who's sort of said to be the originator of chocolate in France. And chocolate in those days was really for the nobles, and it was an expensive and exotic item that was considered to be an aphrodisiac by many. So basically it grew popular and continued along, and essentially the cacao bean factories began popping up in the 1700s, and essentially it was really in the 19th century that it became accessible to the masses, and you see what you see today here. So let's go ahead and cut into this further. So next we're going to look at La Merlat, which is this one over here. So this is La Merlat, and it's filled with a creme brulee, and creme brulee is known as, and then covered with ganache and a biscuit. Creme brulee is just known as burnt cream, and France is one of the places that lays claim to it. And it's basically just a rich custard, and it's sort of a burnt cream from in the inside there. So it really wasn't that common really until 1980s when it really exploded. and it's become the monstrous dessert dish that it is today. So, one of the earliest mentions of this is in 1691, but it sort of describes the flan part of it, but not really the burnt caramel on top, which is sort of its own. There's some other places. So really, the term creme brulee didn't even appear until the 19th century at all. So it really has vanilla, sugar, and eggs. So let's now go ahead and take a look at the croissant, and then we can move on. So lastly, we have the croissant and pain au chocolat, which is a flaky pastry stuffed often with chocolate or almond paste. So this is in Paris. It's really the center of the croissant, the center of the pastry world. So the basic ingredients for this dish, sort of a crispy, flaky crust. This one's filled with chocolate here. And it can be traced back to the ancient Mediterranean civilization, but is in France where the rich choux and puff pastry really developed. Marie de Medici was believed to have played some part in transferring puff pastry from Tuscany to Paris, probably around the 15th century. But it is the Viennese kipfel, which is a type of sweetbread of which the croissant is based. So this was brought to Paris in the 1830s by Auguste Zang, who founded a Viennese bakery there. And their reference to croissants as an established French bread crop as early as 1850. So it's commonly thought that Marie Antoinette brought the croissant to Paris, but she did have a German cook and probably ate a kipfel or even a croissant herself. So after the French monarchy fell, the Parisians quickly regained their appetite for high cuisine, and so they tried to emulate the old aristocratic way of life, and so they established patisseries that could cater to this. So the Antonin Karim, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but he elevated pastry to a high art. So by 1869, the croissant was a Parisian breakfast staple, even mentioned by Charles Dickens. And in 1872, as the bread of a workman or soldier. So there are a lot of other legends. And this was invented to celebrate the defeat of the Umayyad forces by the Franks, the Battle of Tours in 732. And the shape represented the Islamic crescent, and also in 1683 in Vienna, they made it to celebrate the defeat of the Ottomans. So the baker stood up all night and heard the tunneling operation and gave the alarm. And out as a reward, was allowed to sell these pastries. So there's a lot of interesting histories, and ultimately, Paris and France had the croissant as one of their staples, and up to this day. And it is one of the most delicious things if you have not tried it. So anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed taking a look at some of these beautiful desserts. And I hope that you can appreciate some of the art that goes into creating these. And I should have 2 more videos coming out of Paris sometime fairly soon. So hope you enjoyed it.